This video is about the benefits and problems with construct ambiguity. To build a theoretical framework for your empirical research, you must decide what theories and constructs you'd like to study. Let's assume that you've already known what theories and constructs you'd like to include in your theoretical framework. The next step is to define constructs. One problem with defining constructs lies with ambiguity. Before ambiguous constructs become a problem, let's first look at the benefits of ambiguous constructs. You often see authors say there is no agreed on definition of XYZ. Some authors then move on to critique existing definitions, followed by proposing a new or integrated definition. This template of writing is a norm, not an exception. In fact, I rarely see a construct that has a universally agreed definition, particularly in social sciences. A definition is a statement of the meaning of a term. A term may have multiple meanings, thereby requiring multiple definitions. To some extent, ambiguous definitions of constructs are helpful. The ambiguity in construct definitions allows a construct to be measured with flexibility. This flexibility can then evolve with our understanding and knowledge. In many scientific fields, only constructs that are effectively dead have fixed and immutable definitions. If you see a construct in recent literature, it's highly likely that different authors use different definitions. Take the construct of poverty as an example. It is a commonly used construct in educational leadership research. One definition of poverty is a state of having little material possessions or income. The definition of poverty may sound self-explanatory because you hear and use it so often that you stop investigating how ambiguous it is. How little is considered little? There is a great deal of ambiguity there. A paycheck of $500 per month may be little in the United States, but not in many other countries. Here is another question. How do you know whether an individual is poor or not? To answer this question, you need to define poverty in a more specific way in your research. This process of removing the ambiguity of a construct in your research is also known as developing an operational definition. To operationalize a construct means offering a specific definition and removing construct ambiguity. In research literature, when you say you operationalize X, it means that you render an abstract construct of X into something very precise in an observable or measurable manner. In this process, you have a great deal of flexibility as you operationalize a construct. How do you operationalize the construct of poverty? In research literature, you find that scholars have operationalized poverty very differently. If you want to know if a student is from a poor family in the United States or not, you may look at annual family income. To do so, you can ask student parents to self-report their annual family income. You can look at family tax filing forms. You can also look at census data on median resident income in a given neighborhood and then make your estimates. In educational leadership research, many scholars use the percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunch to operationalize poverty at a school level. But that's not the only way of operationalize the construct of poverty. A student of mine used estimated poverty values on a website called Zillow to operationalize poverty. All of those different operationalizations of poverty allow flexibility of poverty construct. and the flexibility signals uncertainties in the construct, inviting researchers to explore them. Ambiguous constructs also reflect that our knowledge about them is evolving. Take an evolution of definitions of decision-making in educational leadership as an example. An earlier definition was rational, deliberate, purposeful action, beginning with the development of a decision strategy and moving through implementation and appraisal results. This definition was theoretically rooted in rational choices theory, assuming that decision-making was a rational, deliberate process. This definition of decision-making has been challenged by the view that humans sometimes make decisions unconsciously. The view of unconscious decision-making has been the foundation of a relatively new scientific field, behavioral economics, which is the field that studies psychological processes of human decision-making. To behavioral economists, irrational decisions don't mean decision-makers are stupid or crazy. Irrationality simply means inconsistency. When you are grateful, you tend to explore more options in your decision-making process. When you are angry, you tend to have tunnel vision, focusing on a narrow set of options. This inconsistency in your decision-making doesn't mean you are stupid. In fact, all humans tend to be inconsistent in their decision-making in a predictable way. As a result, a different definition of decision-making doesn't differentiate whether it is a conscious process or not. It simply means choosing a course of action out of a choice set. This evolution of definition signifies how our understanding of decision-making has evolved, and the vagueness of concept reflects the uncertainty and incompleteness of our understanding. Is this definition of decision-making perfect? Of course not. Will there be new definitions in the future? Absolutely. Researchers may update their definitions to make them less wrong, and you are invited to challenge existing definitions by refining or refuting them. Ambiguous constructs can be useful in communication. In a book titled The Matter of Facts, authors wrote, "Scientific terms could not always be made precise. Vague terms cannot always be removed or redefined without unintended consequences for the whole theory." Ambiguous constructs can be considered as an ongoing conversation among scholars. The meaning of a construct changes in context and across time. There will always be ambiguous constructs in your field. A healthy amount of ambiguity in constructs can inspire us, but too much ambiguity creates confusion. A construct, by definition, has a particular meaning. If that meaning becomes amorphous, how do you even know you and I are talking about the same thing? Now it is time to talk about the problem with ambiguous constructs. The field of educational leadership is not short of ambiguous constructs. Despite the benefits, ambiguity in construct has clear limitations. Too much ambiguity leads to a lack of clarity. If theory is an explanation, then you can consider construct definition as a vocabulary of explanation. When the vocabulary means different things to you and me, are you sure you and I are talking about the same thing? As the physicist Richard Feynman put it, the real problem in speech is not a precise language. The problem is a clear language. The desire is to have the idea clearly communicated to the other person. It is only necessary to be precise when there is some doubt as to the meaning of a phrase, and then the precision should be put in place where the doubt exists. it is really quite impossible to say anything with absolute precision, unless that thing is so abstract from the real world as to not represent any real thing. A lack of construct clarity is prevalent in educational leadership literature. Many theories and constructs are widely used but poorly defined. A definition of a construct can be largely overlapped with a different construct. Take teacher leadership as an example. In more than a decade of literature, teacher leadership was either rarely defined or was defined ambiguously as mobilizing instructional expertise about teaching and learning to improve instruction and school culture. This definition has at least two problems. First, it includes an ambiguous construct of school culture. Have you seen some people use school culture and school climate interchangeably? Or have you seen some people emphasize that school culture focuses on values and beliefs, but school climate is more like the weather, which can change on a daily basis? Or have you seen other people who claim school culture and school climate are different, but they use the same or very similar survey questions to measure them? This is like you use a ruler marked with inches to measure the length of a sheet of paper, and Abby uses a ruler marked with centimeters to measure the same thing. Are you and Abby talking about the same length? There is not much construct clarity of school culture. Construct ambiguity creates messy territory. Second, the definition of teacher leadership was closely aligned with both instructional and participative leadership. Moreover, in about 20% of teacher leadership studies, distributed leadership was used as the theoretical framework. If so, is teacher leadership a new label when distributed leadership is applied to teaching and learning context? Or is it a fundamentally different construct? When definitions of constructs are too elusive and overly inclusive, they offer little guidance in research. Take sense-making as an example. Sense-making, as the name suggests, refers to individuals or groups using prior experiences and knowledge to navigate ambiguous situations, make sense of information, and decide how to respond. This definition of sense-making is very similar to social cognition, which rests on two assumptions. First, humans have a limited capacity to process all information. Second, the cognitive process of making sense of information is subject to individual capacities, such as attention, social pressures, and the limitations of information search. For example, how school leaders make sense of race was subject to their own racial identity and their role identity, as well as the history of their schools and communities, organizational norms, values, and beliefs. Sense-making is also similar to upper echelons theory, which argues leaders' characteristics such as knowledge, experience, values, personalities, and preferences function as a filter and a processor of information. To do so, they go through a three-step process. Leaders' characteristics influence, first, field of vision, that is, the directions leaders look and listen. Second, selective perception, that is, what leaders actually see and hear. And third, interpretation, that is, how leaders attach meaning to what they see and hear. How a leader makes sense is bounded by the shackles of their own experience. While the content and the labels for these constructs differ somewhat from one another, there is a clear overlap in construct definitions. When it comes to what specific psychological and social processes that leaders' characteristics are converted into the sense they make in an ambiguous situation, it still remains largely a mystery. Taken together, sense-making, social cognition, and upper echelons theory were developed on the premise of bounded rationality. If those constructs confuse you, don't be frustrated. You're not alone. Neither indistinguishable or nebulous definition is helpful for your research. There will be endless theories and theoretical constructs. Some theories may ring true to you. To use those theories for your research, the first step is to remove the fuzziness of a construct by setting boundaries and limits and specifying what is included in the construct and what is not. Definitions are not just semantic clarifications. Rather, they are foundational for understanding the scope and magnitude of a phenomenon. When construct definitions arrive with ambiguity and incoherence, they create confusion. They become rhetoric and fanciful embroidery. The consequence is that we lose grip of constructs as the very definition of a construct is a particular meaning that has been attached. In addition to defining a construct, you need to operationalize a construct into something very precise in an observable and measurable manner. You sometimes run into another set of ambiguity problems even when you have a clear construct definition. There are at least two problems with construct operationalization. First, construct operationalization misaligns with the construct definition. Take abusive supervision as an example. Abusive supervision was defined as subordinates' perceptions of the extent to which supervisors engage in the sustained display of hostile verbal and nonverbal behavior, excluding physical contact. However, some survey items used to measure abusive supervision were negative behavior, but not necessarily abusive. Here is an example of a survey item. My supervisor breaks promises and doesn't give me credit for jobs requiring a lot of effort. The behavior described here is negative, but is it truly abusive? The second problem with construct operationalization is that the same survey items are sometimes used to measure different constructs. For example, some scholars use certain survey items to measure the construct of distributed leadership, such as deciding which courses are offered, appointing or hiring teachers, and dismissing or suspending teachers from employment. The very same survey items were used by other scholars to measure the construct of shared decision-making. As a result, construct operationalization adds another layer of ambiguity in educational leadership research. Defining and operationalizing a construct establish boundaries for research. You are encouraged to take up the challenge to refine definitions of constructs in educational leadership. Again, it is a norm, not an exception, that definitions of a construct remain contested, regardless of which definitions you adopt or develop. You, as a researcher, need to distinguish one definition from others and make clear which definition you use in your research. If you want to know more about how to build a theoretical framework for your research, I have published a book titled Demystify Theories, a workbook for developing theoretical frameworks of educational leadership research. The link of the book is in the description below.